Thank you, Karen. Years ago, I was well before I had met Caroline. I was already pastoring. I was living by myself. Had my own house, and I had noticed that something. I had a couple of flower beds, and I noticed that something had been digging in them. Some vermin of some sort. And one night I was coming in. It was dark, and my headlights caught at least one of the things that was doing this. It was a raccoon. I don't know what he was digging for, but he was messing up and uprooting stuff that I'd spent money to plant. And so I thought, I need to do something about this. Thought about it, and I thought, well, what I need to do is to somehow trap these raccoons. And I made some phone calls, found there was a local hardware store that sold animal traps. I went over there and explained to them I needed one that was big enough to be able to hold a raccoon. And he said, yeah, we've got some of those. And he pulls one out. And I said, well, in terms of bait, what do you put in there? He said, I don't know why it is this way. He said, but raccoons tend to like sweet stuff. He said, personally, I recommend those pecan swirls. Who knew? Anyway, so I bought the trap. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home, and I bought a pack of those Little Debbie pecan swirls. I get home, and I find an appropriate place in the backyard to put this trap. I put a pecan swirl inside of it, and I set the trap. I go back in the house. It's still, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6, 7 o'clock. I don't know what time it was. It's still daylight. It was in the summertime. And I got something to eat, and a little bit later I looked out the back window, and the trap is empty. I haven't caught anything. And so I sit down and watch TV for a little while. It's already dark at this point, and I go to the window, and I can't quite see. I flip on the porch light. I can't tell. And I shine a flashlight, and the trap is still empty. So I went to bed that night a little anxious, thinking, am I going to be able to catch anything? Because to this point, I still have not. The next morning, I woke up, and it was like Christmas morning all of a sudden, and I was just really excited. I get up, and my first thought is, I need to see if I've got a raccoon. Isn't that your first thought, right? Oh, goody, goody. And so I get up, I grab my glasses, I head to the window in my bedroom, I open the blinds, and I look outside, and sure enough, I've got a raccoon in my trap. Yes, big day. Anyway, this trap does not kill them. It's a tenderheart trap. It just catches them. And I'm going to head outside to see this. But before I do this, I need a camera. Because if you've got a raccoon, you need a picture of it. So I head outside and I walk towards the trap. But I'm doing so, quite frankly, in a very cautious way for a couple of reasons. One, I don't know exactly how secure this trap is in terms of keeping that raccoon in there. I don't know if you're aware of this. Raccoons are not friendly animals. They're not known for their hospitality. Beyond that, it becomes very evident to me that my raccoon is not thrilled with his accommodations. And so I am approaching this, and at first I thought maybe he's smiling, and then I realized, no, he's not smiling, and I go over and I look at him, and raccoons really are beautiful animals, and it's not often that you're able to get, this close to one of them, but here I am, I'm looking at this raccoon in this cage. I take his picture. Surprisingly, again, he does not smile, but I get that, and now, all of a sudden, it dawns on me a very important question. What do I do with it? I mean, I've got what I wanted. I wanted to trap one of these things. I've got one. I've got the raccoon right in front of me. Now, what do I do with it? Once I've got what I want, what do I do next? Last week, we began a series of messages that the theme of which is built around a statement of Jesus in Revelation 21, where Jesus says this, I make all things new. And what we have been and what we started doing was to look at that statement through the lens of one particular man's life, through an encounter that this man named Saul of Tarsus had with Christ. And we discovered how God desired to make all things new in Saul's life. And he has this amazing encounter with the Lord that God wants to use to absolutely make all things new in his life, to take him and make him from being one that is headed away from God and lead him to become one that's pursuing God, to transform him as one that had been working against God to be one through whom God could actually work. And what we talked about last week, very simply, is this: the difference that God made in the life of a man named Saul of Tarsus, how he made all things new in his life. Well, the truth is, he not only wants to do that, but he can do that in your life. But it may be that you've already experienced that and you've begun a relationship with him, but it's entirely possible that as time has passed, you have kind of neglected that relationship. And in truth, you've really kind of wandered from God. And it may be very much that you're faithful in attending church, but away from here, you're very much headed in ways away from God. And what could be, should be, and ought to be, quite frankly, that's not being practiced. And what you desire, what you have wanted to experience is, especially here with the start of a new year, is a fresh start, to be able to get a clean slate. Well, the question then that we're posed with is this: what happens when God does that? Once He makes you a new person and gives to you a relationship with Him, or once you have already known Him but you come back to Him and you get close again and you've got this fresh start and this clean slate, what next? What do you do then? Well, look with me, if you will, in your Bibles to Acts chapter 9, and I think we'll find the answer to that. Acts chapter 9, and we'll pick up today with verse 6. Acts chapter 9, starting with verse 6. Saul is still here on this road to Damascus. He's headed there, and we'll talk more about what he was going to do in a moment, but he has this amazing encounter with God that begins in the form of this blinding light. He falls to his face. God speaks to him, identifies who it is that he is. He says in verse 5, "I am Jesus whom you are persecuting." But then in verse 6, we're told that Saul, still trembling and astonished, said, "Lord, what do you want me to do?" And the Lord said, "Arise and go into the city, and you'll be told what you must do." And the men who journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice but seeing no one. Saul arose from the ground, and when his eyes were opened, he saw no one, but they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. He's blind at this point. And he was there 3 days without sight, neither eating or drinking. And there was a certain disciple in Damascus named Ananias. And the Lord had said to him in a vision, "Ananias." And he said, "Here I am, Lord." And the Lord said to him, "Arise and go to the street called Straight. Inquire at the house of Judas, for one called Saul of Tarsus, behold, he is there praying. And in a vision he has seen a man named Ananias coming in and putting his hand on him so that he might receive his sight. And Ananias answered, "Lord, I have heard from many about this man, how much harm he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. And here he has the authority from the chief priest to bind or arrest all who call on your name." But the Lord said, "Go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name before Gentiles, kings, and the children of Israel. I will show him how many things he must suffer for my name's sake." Now Ananias went his way and entered the house. Laying his hands on Saul, he said, "Brother Saul, the Lord Jesus, who appeared to you on the road as you came, has sent me that you may receive your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit." Immediately there fell from his eyes something like scales. He received his sight at once, and he arose and was baptized. So when he had received food, he was strengthened. Saul spent some days with the disciples at Damascus. All right, so here you've got this Saul of Tarsus, this guy that is our case study, and God doing what he said he was going to do, and that is to make all things new. Saul is a different man now because of this encounter with Christ. So what next? If you experience that, what next? Or if God gives to you a fresh, clean slate, a new start, what next? Well, based on Saul's experience here, I think there's a few things that we need to keep in mind. The first is this: be satisfied with the small steps. Be satisfied with small steps. When last we left Saul, he had really very much begun this journey to Damascus as an absolute religious zealot. He's a guy steeped in formal traditional Judaism, and he views Jesus and the entire message about Jesus as being a colossal threat. And not simply a threat to Judaism, but it was a threat so great that it needed to be stamped out. And so he is headed to Damascus, intent on conducting an inquisition in the various synagogues in that city, seeking to find any many that may be or thinking about becoming followers of Jesus. And the plan is if he finds them, he'll arrest them and take them back to Jerusalem so that they might be dealt with. And so you're probably, many of you, familiar with that. We looked at this last week, this encounter that he has with the Lord on the road to Damascus. And in the process, God reveals himself to Saul. He lets him know who he is. He speaks to him. He reveals the truth about what it is that he has been doing and the direction that he has been going. And in short, God changes Saul. He makes in his life all things new. He is a different man now. He and his life, they're headed in a different direction. He's had this encounter with Jesus that has changed him. And in verse 6, he does the logical. He asks the reasonable. You see it there. He says, Lord, what do you want me to do? All right, so I have experienced this. What next? Where do I go? What do you want from me now? What do I do? And the Lord responds with specific instructions in verse 6. He says, arise and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. Well, there's a couple of things that are noteworthy about that, and here's the first. God does not want people that follow him to just figure life out and say, all right, there's this whole panoply of different options and various paths that I could go down. I think I'll just pick that one. He doesn't want us to be going randomly and aimlessly through life. He wants to guide us. Hebrews tells us that the Lord is the rewarder of those who diligently seek him. And one of the great rewards is found in Psalm 48. We're told that God will be our guide to the end. That's what God desires. And when you pursue him, what God will do, and what we see here, is that he will guide you. He will show you what should happen next. That's very encouraging. I hope you view that as meaningfully positive, because it is. That's noteworthy. But there's something else that's noteworthy about this. Saul says, what do you want me to do? And God says, arise and go into the city. And then you'll be told what to do next. Leave here, go into the city, go into Damascus, and then you'll hear more later. Is he told a whole lot? Is there some master plan that is revealed where he gets this lengthy to-do list and a series of accomplishments that he needs to check off? Is there this boatload of data for which he needs to all of a sudden be responsible for? Is that what he receives from God? No. Just leave where you are and go into the city, and you'll be told what to do next. Pretty small step, isn't it? Well, sure it is. And I believe that's very instructive for us, because when God gives to an individual a fresh start as one of his followers, or he makes you one of his followers and in your life makes all things new, he actively seeks to guide you and doesn't want you just to kind of figure things out. And as he's guiding you and shows you what to do next, you need to recognize that what's generally going to come is a small step. A small step. You know, sometimes with the best of intentions, we can screw things up, can't we? Sure we can. Let me give you an example. I remember years ago, as a high school student at my home church, we were having this revival that was going on. And I don't know which night of the week it was, but there was one night designated as youth night. And as teenagers, we were encouraged to invite our friends, see if we could bring some folks with us. And I did that. There was a friend of mine that lived across the street from me. His name was Matt. I'd had conversations with Matt before I knew that he didn't have a personal relationship with Christ. I thought, well, this would be a good opportunity. So I told Matt about what was going on, invited him, and he said, yeah, I'll go. And he went with me that night. And so we have the service. The preacher in the message gives a clear gospel presentation. At the end of the service, there's a time for people to make decisions. And Matt got up and he responded during that invitation and made the decision to become a follower of Christ. All those that made decisions that night were then taken to a different room where they had counselors that were going to just do some immediate follow-up with them. And someone had asked me to help with that. And since I knew Matt, I had this relationship with him, it was reasonable then that I would talk to him. And to this very day, I remember not only what I did, but I also regret what it was that I did. I'm sitting down with Matt, and I started going through my Bible, and page after page, and verse after verse, and chapter after chapter, I'm saying, okay, Matt, you need to do this, and you need to do that, and this and that. You need to understand this, and you need to understand that. It's effectively like I'm giving him an intro to systematic theology, and I'm giving this whole lengthy to-do list. And as I think about that, even until this very moment, I just want to smack myself in the head and say, what were you thinking? What were you thinking? I mean, I'm going on and on and on and on and on. And the truth is, Matt didn't need that from me. He didn't need all that from me. He didn't need that from anybody else. And quite frankly, he didn't need all that from God. Do you know what he needed? He didn't need every step. He just needed the next one. You know, and when God makes a person new, or when you as one of his followers, he gives to you a fresh start and a clean slate, he understands that. He knows exactly what it is that you need. And what he does is not lay out all the steps, just to give you the next one. Generally, it's a small step. It's interesting what God does not do. He doesn't say, when Saul says, okay, what next? He doesn't say, well, you need to know this, that, and the other. And you need to understand that you're going to wind up going to Ephesus and Philippi and Colossae. You're going to be having these particular men, people like Timothy and Barnabas, that you're going to invest in, and this guy named John Mark you're going to have these issues with. So you're going to go to these various cities, and you're going to plant these churches. Get your pen ready, because you're going to need to write 13 of the 27 books of the New Testament. And so beyond that, keep in mind this. You're going to be arrested. You're going to be shipwrecked. You're going to wind up under house arrest in Rome. And finally, the Roman emperor is going to order your execution. Does he give him all that? He says, go to Damascus, and then you'll be told what to do next. We need to understand that, generally speaking, that's how it is that God operates. When he makes a person new, when he gives to someone a fresh start, what he will give is not all the steps. He'll just give the next one. And this is what you need to get. You need to be okay with that. You need to be satisfied with that. And truthfully speaking, oftentimes we're not. Oftentimes we're not. And so many times, and maybe you have experienced this or you've witnessed this in someone else's life, that God makes them this new creation in Jesus, and they've got this relationship with him that they're so excited about, or you get this fresh start, you get this clean slate, and you are ready to just charge hell with a water pistol, and you're so excited, and you're ready to do something. Okay, God, what next? I need something to do, and I want you to give me some stuff to do, but quite frankly, God, I want some big stuff to do. I want to do some things that are meaningful and consequential. I want to start teaching a whole lot of people. I want to be going on this trip. I want to do all these great and significant things. And then sometimes we can get disappointed when that doesn't happen. What I'm saying to you is that God doesn't lay out all the steps. He gives the next one. And generally speaking, they tend to be small steps, because the one that's faithful in little will become one that is faithful in much. God will give you small steps. And oftentimes, it may be something as simple as this. I want you to spend some time coming to understand what I've said, and in the process, get to know me. It may be something as simple as this, where he says, you've got some friends at school, or you've got a coworker. I just want you to have a conversation with them and tell them about the difference that I've made in your life. The small steps are what we're going to get. And when all things become new, or we get a fresh start, we need to be satisfied with that. Be satisfied with the small steps. But there's something else that we must do, and that's this. Forgo the word coincidence. Forgo the word coincidence. In verse 10, we're introduced to another character, this man named Ananias. And we're told a few things about him. First of all, he lives in Damascus. Beyond that, he is a follower of Christ. This is a man that's got a real relationship with God, and he's committed to the Lord, and he's a guy that talks to God, and God speaks to him. And the Lord has come to Ananias and said, I want you to do something. You see it in verse 11. Arise and go to the street called Straight. So go down to Straight Street in Damascus. And on that street, there's a man named Judas who's got a house on that road. I want you to go to his house. And inside, there's a man named Saul of Tarsus that you'll find praying. And I have shown him in a vision that a man named Ananias is going to show up and pray that he might receive his sight. So he's got something to do. But in verse 13, Ananias starts responding with excuses. Lord, I have heard from many about this man, how much harm he has done to your saints in Jerusalem. It's as if he's operating under the premise that God doesn't know who he's dealing with. It's as if he's saying to God, time out on that, Lord. I want you to just understand, Saul of Tarsus is a bad dude. Saul of Tarsus is not our friend. This is somebody that is going around arresting Christians. This is somebody that supports the beating and the imprisonment of Christians. This is a guy that has taken part in the execution of Christians. You know, me going and actively seeking him out, God, that's not a smart move. That's like a sheep chasing a wolf. Because if I go there to Saul of Tarsus as one of your followers, well, I'm going to be in prison. That's going to be the end of my service for you. And God responds, he says, go, for he is a chosen vessel of mine to bear my name. God's response to him essentially is this: I got it under control. I know all that. I have decided that I'm going to use him. Okay. And so in verse 17, Ananias, it says, goes this way. He enters the house just as God told him to. He lays hands on Saul, and then he prays for him that he might receive his sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit. Verse 18, this man who has been blinded for days now by this amazing light on the road to Damascus, he's got what seemed to be scales covering his eyes. All of a sudden that falls off, and his sight has been restored. He's filled with the Spirit of God. He's commissioned as a servant of the Lord. Let's see if we can put those little details together and see if there's something to this. Saul has come to believe in Jesus, and he's become one of his followers. But he needs some help. He needs some real help. First of all, he needs some help with his sight because he's blind. Beyond that, he has embarked on this new journey following Jesus, a man about whom he knows very little. He needs some help and understanding. He needs some encouragement from people that know more than he does. And so he has gone to Damascus, where he is a known persecutor of Christians. And a committed Christian, a committed follower of Jesus, actively seeks him out and intentionally goes to a house where he knows that he is and offers a prayer of blessing and a prayer of healing. And all of a sudden, his sight is restored and he's commissioned as a servant of Jesus. Is that just good luck? Is that just the right people being at the right place and at the right time? No. Is this chance or happenstance at work? Not a chance. Fat chance, because there is no chance in this. What we see is that God is actively at work bringing various pieces of a much larger puzzle together. And the truth is, we know what Saul did not know. We know more detail than Ananias knew at that point. All these two men know is that God has given them some specific instructions. They don't know exactly what he is up to in locations away from where they are. They don't know what he's doing in the hearts and the minds and the life of the other person. That they have no idea exactly what it is that God is up to. All they get is this little small detail. They didn't realize that God was up to something far bigger than either of them individually. Based on this, there's something I want you not simply to understand, but there's something I want you to understand in such a way that affects how you live. When you are seeking to follow God's guidance, again, we said it a few moments ago, He's going to guide you. When He makes you new or He gives you a fresh start, He's going to show you what the next step is. And as you follow Him, there's going to be things that you're able to witness. There's going to be things that fall into place. There's going to be what seem to be impossible challenges becoming realized potential. There's going to be opportunity that you never would have ever thought of becoming legitimate reality. There's going to be needs for which you thought there's no way for this to be met, and all of a sudden somehow it is. Doors that had been closed get open. Now, when you witness this and when you're seeing these things happen, what I want you to understand, it's not being at the right place at the right time. It's not the stars lining up in perfect alignment. This is not happenstance. This is not coincidence. This is providence. It's not coincidence. And you need to decide at the outset, before you even begin to witness any of this, you need to say, you know what, I'm just going to forego the word coincidence. Because if I trust that God is guiding, then I've also got to trust that He's up to stuff that I don't know. And He's got a big puzzle in mind that He's bringing individual pieces together. And I don't know all of that. And so as I see the puzzle beginning to form, I'm not going to chalk it up to chance. I'm not going to chalk it up to coincidence. I'm going to say very simply, God is at work. Let me see if I can paint a picture for you. 4 years ago in December marked when we first physically moved to Greensboro, and were able to find a house that has been a blessing to us. Quite frankly, that house has worked for us. It does work for us. It's possible for it to continue to work for us. That being said, we're a family of 6. You know, at this point, we might be a family of 20. I have no idea. And with the passage of time, our children are getting bigger, their stuff gets bigger and also gets more numerous. And so with the passage of time, we've come to recognize that though our house is a blessing, you know, we recognize in time, space, and particularly storage is going to become a challenge for us. But our house works for us. It can work for us. We recognize it's a blessing. Back in early October, Caroline was driving through a neighborhood very close actually to here, and saw that there was a sign in the yard for sale by owner at this house. She pulled a flyer on it and was interested enough in it that she told me, she said, hey, why don't you drive by this house and see what you think? And I drove by and looked at it, and I pulled one of the flyers. We talked about it and was intrigued enough that I decided to call the number that was on there. And so it turned out that the owners had died. The children are selling this house. It was their parents' house. And we made an appointment to go look at it. This is in early October. And we went to see this house, and we recognized on so many different levels this house works for us. It has more bedrooms. It has more living space. It has tons more storage. It's 50% bigger than our current home, but because of how things could potentially work out, it would cut our mortgage maybe more than half so that it could be paid off in 7 years. I mean, that's a goal that we have, I think a God-honoring goal, that we want to be debt-free. The only indebtedness we have is a mortgage, and we'd love to see that go away. And we very much were interested, very much liked the house. And what they were asking for it was not a terrible price, but we knew what things were going for in the neighborhood. We'd looked at some comps, paid attention to that, and just felt like their price was a bit too high, and they seemed to be kind of stuck on it, so we just walked away. That's mid-October. After that, I didn't know exactly what to do, and I just began to talk to the Lord about it, and I said, Lord, I really don't know what to do. I don't know what's best. I really don't. I know on paper, this very much makes sense for us. This is a prudent, sensible move that on a variety of levels would work for our family, but I don't know what's best. I don't know what the future holds, and I don't know how things are going to pan out. You do, obviously. And so I need you to kind of let me in on this. I don't know whether we should act or what. And so I prayed something very specific. I said, Lord, would you have them call us and be willing to take a particular price, a price that was $22,000 less than their asking price. And so I began to pray this. And October ends. I haven't heard anything. November begins. We begin the second week of November. Haven't heard anything. And in all honesty, I'm okay with this. I'm viewing things not working out as God showing, okay, this was an opportunity, but not one necessarily that I'm in. But I just continued to pray that. And on Thursday, the week before Thanksgiving, it was a day that we found out that Caroline had lost the baby and miscarried. I was with her that day. And the next day I returned to the office, and the little light on my phone was blinking. There was a message, and it was from the daughter, Angela. And she said, I couldn't find your cell phone number, but I knew what church you were at. And so I just wanted to let you know, if you guys are at all still interested, we've come to recognize we're not going to get what we thought we would for the house. If you're still interested, know that we would take seriously anything that you would come to the table with. And so I called Caroline, told her about it, and called Angela back. And I said, listen, if it's okay, we'd like to see the house one more time. 2 days later, or the next day on that Saturday, we went to see the house again. And at the end of having seen the house, we talked to Angela, and I said, here's the deal. We really do like this house, and we love so much about it. So much about it really works for us. But truthfully, where we are price-wise is this. And I told her that number, the number that I had told repeatedly to God. And so I told her that. And what happened? Well, we're supposed to close the end of next month. Now, could you say that's coincidence? I don't think so. Is that chance? Fat chance. What I would say to you, I believe it's God at work. And when you want Him to guide you, you will find Him guiding. And as He guides, you need to forego the word coincidence. Because a God that's at work is at work in the lives of and in the circumstances of people in scenarios and circumstances far beyond you. And you need to decide at the outset, that whole coincidence thing, that's going to go out the window. I'm not citing or claiming coincidence. I'm claiming providence, believing that there's a God in heaven that's absolutely at work, guiding me. And as He's guiding, He's opening up doors and providing opportunities, and He's doing things that I would have never, ever dreamed. When God makes a person new, when He gives to you a fresh start, well, you got to forego the word coincidence. But there's a final thing that, based on Saul's experience, we need to do, and that is to make sure you're in good company. Make sure that you are in good company. Saul is a new man. God has changed him. He's still in the process of changing him. He's given to him this small step, this task of going into Damascus. He's restored his sight. Saul is seeing God at work in ways that absolutely cannot be described as coincidence. So what happens next? It's very simple, but I believe it to be very important. All right, at the end of verse 18, Saul's sight has been restored. Then we're told that he was baptized. The beginning of verse 19, those that are with him there, they give Saul something to eat. He's not eaten anything in days. And then we're told, then Saul spent some days with the disciples at Damascus. Saul spent some days with the disciples there at Damascus. Well, what's going on there? Saul has been made new. He is a different man. And what he does is to spend time with, surrounding himself with disciples of Jesus. And what do? Well, Luke doesn't tell us here, but I think we can reasonably assume what it is that they do. They start telling him the stories of Jesus. They start sharing with him what the disciples had shared. And they start pointing him to the Old Testament scriptures and painting the picture and helping Saul come to realize Jesus was, in fact, the fulfillment of God's promises throughout the course of the Old Testament. They come to help him see and discover that this Messiah that he had been looking for was not someone that was to come as a conquering king and as a dictator to throw off Roman oppression, but he came as a suffering servant seeking to establish peace between man and God. That's what Saul does. He hangs out with these people. They invest in him. They pour into his life. But it's noteworthy not simply what Saul does, it's especially noteworthy what Saul does not do. Once his sight is restored, once his belly is full, he does not get back on the road and head back to Jerusalem. He does not go back and find the Pharisees of whom he had been a part. He does not go back to the high priest and start trying to chum it back up with him. He doesn't even go off by himself. He surrounds himself with real followers of Jesus. It cannot be overstated the effect of influence that we have on each other, that people have on other people. Given that reality, when the Lord makes a person new, or when you as one of his followers get from him a fresh start and a clean slate, if you want to stay on that path, if you want to stay on that track, and if you want to stay on a road that is heading you toward him, one in which he is working through you, you have got to surround yourself and share life with people that are headed in the same direction. You've got to spend time with and share your life with people that share biblical convictions and a godly worldview. Again, notice what Saul does not do. He does not head back to Jerusalem. But think with me for a second what would have happened if he did. Suppose Paul goes back and he gets back in with the Pharisees. Suppose he has an opportunity to sit down and talk with the high priest. And maybe he says, guys, I just want you to hear this. I was headed to Damascus, going to conduct this inquisition like we had planned, like you, high priest, signed off on. Had this amazing encounter with Jesus, and he's changed me. And he's helped me to come to realize I had it. And guys, I want you to understand this. We all had it wrong about it. Completely wrong. And we've been working against God and not for him. Suppose he had gone back and spent that time with them. What do you think they would have done if he comes back sharing stories like this? Well, it's likely that they would have beat him, maybe even killed him, at the least imprisoned him and sought to re-educate him. They would have sought to intentionally influence him, reminding him of the tradition of the elders, reminding him of what he had been about for all of his life up until that point, reinforcing old habits and old ways. In short, what they would have sought to do was to intentionally influence him in such a way that that which became new returned to being really, really old. They would have sought to intentionally influence him. Sometimes the influence that we have on each other is like that, where someone is actively, or maybe you are acting to intentionally influence or affect someone else. But oftentimes it happens much more subtly than that, doesn't it? And it's not necessarily where someone is trying to make us like them, where they're seeking to actively influence us. Rather, it is wired into each of us to varying degrees, is the desire to find approval from others, from groups that we hang out with. And by and large, what then happens is that we seek to act in ways that might solicit or gain their approval. And the greatest way we can do that is to act like them. You know, sometimes the influence is very direct and in your face. Sometimes it's more subtle, where we just kind of want to go along and follow the crowd. Let me see if I can paint the picture for you this way. There's something that's very strange about Caroline, far stranger than the fact that she is married to me. If Caroline is talking to someone who speaks English but is from a foreign country and they have a foreign accent, the longer she talks with them, the more she picks up their accent. It's very strange. I remember on our honeymoon, we were on a cruise, and there were these two older ladies from England that we met and spent a lot of time with. We enjoyed talking with them, but they had these beautiful British accents. And the longer we talked with them, the more I wondered, have I married Lady Macbeth? And it wasn't that she intended or was trying to do that. It's just that the more time we spent with them, the more she just kind of picked it up. Subtle influence. I have seen, spiritually speaking, that same type of thing. You have probably seen, spiritually speaking, that same type of thing repeated times over the years. And that is where somebody has this amazing encounter with God that seems to absolutely change them. They are absolutely made to be new. Or it's somebody that comes back to God, somebody that knew Him, but He gives them a fresh, clean slate, and they are so enthusiastic, they're so on fire for the Lord, and they're so zealous in this newness that they are experiencing. But then, all of a sudden, they fall in with the same old friends who have the same old habits, they have the same old worldview, the same old convictions, and the same old priorities. And it doesn't take much time, and very quickly you look and say, what happened? What happened? You've probably heard that cliche before. Show me your friends and I'll show you your future. There's a lot of truth in that, isn't there? Because those that we are the closest to, and those with whom we spend the greatest amount of time, are those that we are most likely to become like, isn't it? But notice what Saul does. This is somebody that the Lord has made all things new in him. And what does he do? He spends time with committed followers of Jesus who pour into him, who share life with him, who encourage him, who disciple him. And they not only are helping and encouraging him, they're also holding him accountable so that the road that he has chosen now to take, that he's able to actually stay on that road. You know, the surest way to guard a fresh start with Jesus is to make sure that you are keeping good company. So where does all this leave us today? Where does this leave you? Where does this intersect your life? Well, it may very well be this morning, or in particular over the past couple of weeks, that God's been speaking to your heart. And this whole idea of all things becoming new, you recognize two things. That hasn't happened to you, but you'd like for it to. The truth is, God is offering and He's extending to you an invitation. The question is, will you respond to it? Will you experience this newness that Saul experienced? But maybe you say, well, Michael, I've already crossed that road. I know what it's like for Him to make all things new. But the truth is, and I've come to recognize this, and God's kind of showing the truth to me in my heart, I've really wandered. I've really drifted. Maybe it's because of the crowd that you've been running with. Maybe it's because you were so discouraged that God wasn't giving to you big tasks. Maybe it's because you've been blind to what He's been doing and chalking everything up to coincidence. And you're saying, I need to come back. I want a clean slate. I want a fresh start. The question is, will you decide to let Him give that to you today? And in either case, will you tell yourself, will you decide, you know what? The small steps will do. And as I see Him at work, I'm not going to call it coincidence. I'm going to call it providence. And I'm going to be intentional about sharing life with and spending time with and allowing those that are further along in their walk with God to invest in me so that what started as new remains new. Won't you bow your heads with me?